You're about to listen to the Complete Developer Podcast, the podcast by coders, for coders, about all aspects of life as a developer.
I'm Will, the curmudgeonly experienced developer.
And I'm Beej, the optimistic newbie developer. Welcome to another episode of Complete Developer Podcast. This week, we're talking about the role nonverbal cues play in our communication, not just in meetings, but in all interactions we have with each other. We use nonverbal cues to reinforce our communication. They can help us show our emotional state, a level of interest in a topic, and regulate the flow of conversation. We'll focus heavily on understanding the different types of nonverbal communication and what they can mean, discuss some of the patterns that can be seen, and end explaining how nonverbal cues can miscommunicate intentions or how to avoid sending the wrong message. But before we get started, Will, what have you been fighting this week?
I think you and I are both kind of fighting the same thing because we're both clearing our throat a lot and blowing our noses. It's allergy season in Tennessee, and of course we spent most of the day at the Renaissance Festival.
That's true, we did.
Out there with the dirt blowing around, and there's not all the nice animal smells. There's all the nice pollen. There's all the nice people smells, and the not so nice people smells, mostly the not nice ones. And so my sinuses are hosed. I'm not doing too well with it. I kind of think you're pretty much in the same boat. So
yeah, I've been fighting allergies the last couple of weeks,
and they've been beating you the last couple of weeks.
Oh my goodness. This week I was recently over at He Who Shall Not Be Named's house, and they have cats. Cats like me, and I think it's because they know I'm allergic to them.
Seems reasonable.
Yeah. I actually had to miss a day of work a couple weeks ago because I couldn't speak, and that's really bad when your job involves speaking with people.
Yeah, I can see that would be a problem.
On a happier note, I'd like to announce a new podcast that I'm going to be starting up soon called Storytime. And it's going to be one that shares stories for kids, kind of Creative Commons, and some that I write. Mainly it's for my nieces and nephews to listen to me read stories and do silly voices and stuff like that. But it'll be a weekly show ranging from around 15 to 20 minutes of me reading bedtime stories and voicing characters. I've even got my friend Audrey to come on and voice some of the female characters for me. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Just be on the lookout for that.
Because I'm thinking if you voiced the female characters, they would all sound like smokers.
Yeah. Well, they would now, yeah.
Yeah. Especially now.
So guys, gals, if you have kids that like having stories read to them, check out my site, storytime.bowtiebeach.com. It is up, even though I haven't posted any episodes yet. Still working on the audio and mastering and everything for that. So,
but anyway, it's time to roll the music.
Yeah,
so let's get on it.
Roll that music. This week for IoTs, I have something a little different. Rather than a product or a project, I have a platform. This is the Arduino Create. I know I've talked about some other Arduino platforms in the past that didn't cover my Arduino. This one does because it's created by the creators of Arduino. It was recently announced at Arduino Day. The new environment just coming out of beta at the time of this recording, and it's meant to replace the current Arduino dev environment with a web-based platform and toolchain. It's going to allow users to write and share code and connect via the cloud. It's focused on supporting and teaching in the IoT space. Some of the features include guided flows to help configure online services, an Arduino Project Hub, which is basically GitHub for Arduino, Arduino Web Editor, so you can edit code for your Arduino online. And the great thing about this is it hides the API keys for you. So that's built into the platform. So you can share your code on the Arduino Cloud, which uses Amazon's cloud infrastructure.
Nice.
Yeah. I read about this over at makezine.com, and I'll share that link in the show notes. So, Will, do we have a comment this week?
We do not. But I will point out that this is your last week to enter to win a free copy of Bethany Adams' book, Soulbound. So if you would, just leave us a review on iTunes or follow the link www.completedeveloperpodcast.com/iTunes and leave a review. We'll be drawing a winner next week on the show. So if you want to get in and get that autographed copy of the book, now's the time.
So this episode comes from our discussion on listening skills. We had talked about some nonverbal skills there and decided to create an episode just on nonverbal skills because it's such a deep topic. So I'd like to start off with a quote from Edward G. Wertheim, and he wrote a chapter titled The Importance of Effective Communication. A majority of the meaning we attribute to words comes not from the words themselves, but from the nonverbal factors, such as gestures, facial expressions, tone, body language, etc. And before we really get into it, I do want to point out a disclaimer. That is, nonverbal communication and cues differ vastly between cultures. This variance can be as subtle as the amount of space between people when communicating, or so vast that hand gestures used by children in one culture would be very offensive in another. That being said, while we do have some international listeners, our knowledge is primarily based on American culture, so unless otherwise specified, the nonverbal meanings we discuss will be for communication in America. Starting off, what is nonverbal communication?
You actually have a quote here that's, when we interact with others, we continuously give and receive wordless signals. And this is from helpguide.org.
Exactly. And this is the body language that we use when we are communicating. Nonverbal communication helps to reinforce or modify the message, and that is what is said in words. So throughout the episode, as we refer to the message, that is the words being spoken. They also show the emotional state of the speaker and the listener, and can regulate the flow of communication. Just earlier this evening, Will and I were starting to record this episode, and as I was reading the intro, he started off on a tangent.
Well, I didn't really start off on a tangent. I don't think it was a tangent. However, I got the stink eye. So maybe it was.
I gave him a look like, what in the world are you doing? That's not in the show notes.
Yeah, I just totally went with it. But I mean, that's sort of the point of this whole thing, right? Is that the verbal conversations that you're having are not necessarily the bulk of the payload.
Mm-hmm. You may be asking yourself, all right, but why does this matter? Nonverbal communication contains messages to the other person. These can be if you care about the message or the words being spoken, or if you're being truthful about what you're saying. They can define relationships between people. Like Will and I can convey a lot of information with just a glance.
Yeah.
Because over the last 16 years that we've known each other, we've built that rapport. They can also provide feedback to the person speaking and may substitute for verbal messages.
Yeah, we've actually had to use this quite a bit when we've been in noisy environments or in environments where we can't exactly speak our minds, which we've been in quite a few of those over the last year or two especially.
Yeah.
And it's nice to be able to, with a glance, get the point across exactly what you're thinking.
That's so true.
I'd like to kind of derail very slightly here. And
really?
Explain, yeah, because that's my thing, right? That's my shtick. But okay, so we're talking about nonverbal communication versus verbal. Think of your verbal communication as a web request. Think of your nonverbals as TCP/IP.
Okay.
If that makes sense, right? It's the underlying thing that is carrying the message, but it's pretty much hidden from the receiver of the message at that point. So it's almost like you have multiple brains. If that's kind of a useful analogy for how this stuff works.
There's also a very strong reason that Will and I do not record video for our podcast. One, we both have faces for radio, but also we communicate quite a bit throughout the podcast on simple things like, a glance to say, skip the next topic because we're running out of time, or elaborate because we need more time, and things like that.
Well, and the thing is you can communicate with TCP/IP without communicating over HTTP. It's just that's the added bonus of clarity.
Yeah.
But the bulk of the communication is at a lower level. And this is the same sort of paradigm, if that's a good way for programmers to kind of think about it.
So that's an interesting thought. So let's jump on into it with the 5 roles of nonverbal communication. And this also comes from The Importance of Effective Communication by Edward G. Wertheim, who's a PhD. And these are ways that nonverbal communication can be used. So as we go through the different types, think about how each one of those types can be used in these 5 roles. So to start off, we have repetition, which shows the ability to repeat the message.
Right, and that means you understood it. It's very similar to a wire protocol where you send a message and the other guy says, okay, here's the message I got.
Yes.
That way you know the other side understood.
Mm-hmm. And next is contradiction, which can show a contradicting view to the message.
Yeah, so if you send a message and the server sends one back that says, no, this isn't right, or this is not the data that I have, or it doesn't match the database, or, hey, it's been updated since then, you're wrong.
Yes.
That's very similar protocol type setup.
So it'd be something like you're requesting something from a database and the table doesn't exist.
Or if you're updating, you're saying, okay, I changed this person's name from this to this, and that's your update message. And the database goes, that wasn't their name before.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Because they changed it one more time before, so now you know something's wrong.
Mm-hmm. Next is substitution, and this is when nonverbal communication is substituted for the verbal message, such as head nod, eye roll, the glances I give to Will when he gets off topic and we need to bring it back in topic or on topic. Eyes can convey a lot more information than words alone.
Right, and these are analogous. Let's look at HTTP status codes, right? A head nod is basically a 200. It's, hey, this message was accepted. A 404 is basically an eye roll. It's like, dude, you're not even in the right place. And the stink eye that you give me is a 500 error. It's like the server doesn't like it. Every so often it's a 403, which is forbidden.
Yeah, well.
Yeah.
Then there is complementing, which nonverbal cues can add to the verbal message.
Yeah, and there's not really anything analogous on this with HTTP codes because it's a simplification of the way humans communicate for a wire protocol.
Yeah, I mean, outside of a coding example, it's kind of silly examples, but they're going to help me remember too. This is when you're talking to someone and they're telling you a happy story or something really great that happened to them, or when I get to talking about my motorcycle, Will can tell I love riding my bike because like my whole face lights up. Yeah, that is complimenting the verbal message.
Yeah, it's almost a redirection.
Yeah.
Actually, it is.
Yeah. And finally is accentuating. And they can accentuate the message. And what I think of is my father was a preacher, and so whenever he would make a point while speaking in front of people, he would pound on the pulpit or wave his hands around, and I do this a lot too. I'm doing it right now.
We don't know anybody that does that at all.
Yeah. So what is this in our coding terms?
Pounding on a table. Yeah. I don't know. That's, I mean, that happens in meetings a lot, right? But we don't really have, machines don't give emphasis as much
Don't they?
yet. Well, like that's not analogous to things like a wire protocol. That
Well, isn't there
developers
something
understand.
where like this is more important than that?
Oh yeah, like thread scheduling, those kind of things. But I mean, I don't know. It's this is part of where I guess my
This is where the analogy
breaks.
falls apart.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you can pound the table about how terrible of an analogy that was,
Yeah.
and then you'll be accentuating the message.
Okay, so the various types of nonverbal communication, and this is not an exhaustive list, but it covers the majority of what you'll see and need to understand. First off is the most obvious, and that is facial expressions. From smiling to frowning or even blinking. Expressions are, for the most part, universal across culture. It's one of the first things children learn. I remember as a preschool teacher, in the toddler classroom, we would have little cards with a smiley face, and you'd show it to the kids, happy, and a frowny face, sad, angry. Yeah. These are universal pretty much across culture. The variance comes in how much they're expressed. For example, in some cultures, males crying is just not acceptable.
Right.
Whereas in others, it's
expected.
It's
almost.
Expected, especially at like funerals and things like that. If the men aren't sad and showing that, something is wrong. And these are pretty straightforward. It's hard to mess these up because we're taught them so early. The big thing, and this is going to come later, is noticing inconsistencies in them.
Right.
Like
not crying at a funeral or smiling at a funeral.
Yes.
Like that's disturbing. Pretty much cross-culturally.
Yeah, exactly. Next is body movements and posture. This could be hand gestures, nodding, shaking the head, or how you sit or stand. An open posture is directly facing someone, kind of hands apart, and it's used to communicate interest or openness or a readiness to listen. Whereas a closed posture tends to be arms folded, legs may be crossed, you may be facing slightly askew or even away from the person speaking, and this communicates boredom, disagreement, or discomfort. And this is one of the tricky parts here is this could just mean that you are nervous talking to that person.
Yeah, or you have an upset stomach.
Yeah. And this is where understanding body language and postures is important because they may be perceiving it as boredom or disagreement or you don't like them when really it's, the 5 slices of pizza you had for lunch are really bothering you.
It's the aftermath of Taco Tuesday.
Yeah, exactly. And
it's not you, it's them.
Another important thing is mirroring. There's kind of 2 ways to look at mirroring. There is natural mirroring, which happens when 2 people are very close, their postures start to reflect one another. Good friends, people in relationships. When Will and I, we've known each other for 16 years, hang out, we tend to sit pretty similar, and it's not a conscious effort thing. It's just...
Well, if it was conscious, we would notice we were doing it and probably not do it.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's something you fall into, and so that's one type. You've got enough previous history that history is what's driving it, and the other one is where you're basically mirroring them in order to fit.
Yeah, and that's the other one that I was talking about. There's the naturally occurring, and then there's the, I don't want to call it unnatural because it happens naturally, but it's not a, like you said, something that happens because you've been with them, you've known them for so long, you just kind of...
You fall into it.
Fall into it.
Yeah, you fall into it behaviorally versus habitually.
Yes, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah. And then there's also the actively trying to mirror.
Yeah, which is hard to do and actually do well.
Exactly. And you'll see a lot of interview skills and things like this talking about body posture and body language on mirroring the interviewer. This may not always be the best thing because your interviewer may be uncomfortable because of Taco Tuesday.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and the other thing, too, is there's a power dynamic that if you act like you're not observing that, those nonverbals come across very differently than you are actually mirroring someone in a equal social interaction.
Quick example, I was interviewing with a recruiter a couple weeks ago, and we were sitting at a table kind of about the same distance you and I are at. And I didn't realize I was doing this, but she was sitting kind of leaned back, one leg up, and her hands just kind of resting naturally on the table. And I got to talking and going the way I do. And what I noticed was when I stopped talking and she was explaining stuff to me, I fell into the exact same pattern she was in. Not on purpose. It was just because it was a comfortable, relaxed interview.
Yeah.
And I just kind of fell into the same pattern that she had.
Yeah, and that to some degree that's an acquired skill, but it's not a skill that you consciously build up.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one thing. That's what I really wanted to get at is I want to be open and honest with our listeners, and I don't want to try to fool anybody because I feel like some of the posts that I've read about interviewing and mirroring have the best of intentions, but they're really not the best advice.
Yeah.
I want to provide the best advice for our listeners and to let you guys know if it's something that flows naturally, that's good. If the person that's interviewing you or that you're talking to has an uncomfortable position, that may be comfortable for them and they look perfectly comfortable. Don't try to mimic that because it's going to look bad.
Yeah. Most of those articles that I've seen, because I did a little bit of digging on this as well, and those articles are what I like to call far advice versus near advice.
Yeah.
In other words, it's the advice of somebody that's way removed from the situation, trying to go, oh yeah, here's how you just do it. And the person that's in the situation can't just do it because that's not a thing. And that's what most of those articles strike me as. They're well-intentioned, like you said, but they're just not on point.
A lot of them have good advice. It's just like you said, I like that term, they're far advice. I've used some articles like that in creating outlines before. But
they're great for figuring out what kind of advice is crap.
That's true. But, I mean, some of them are really good. It's like they don't go deep enough, or they say, oh, do this, but they don't explore it.
Yeah.
That's the thing I've noticed. And what we want to do with this podcast is to give the near advice. That's why we tell so many personal stories and talk about our own experiences so much. So next is gestures.
Yeah, and you can pretty easily think of some gestures that have pretty direct meaning, especially in American culture. Some of those fly back and forth when we're recording. If I tell a really bad joke, I get told I'm number one.
You get told that earlier today at Ren Fair.
I did. Twice.
He told some bad jokes.
I did.
We won't mention them. So gestures can be broken down into 4 basic categories: emblems, illustrators, regulators, and adapters. And we're going to hit on each one of those. First off are the emblems. And
this is like your okay and
yeah, you come here, you stay. These are gestures that serve as a word. These are the ones that vary most on culture. Little preview of something to come later, but the okay symbol, while used by children in America, is not okay in other places. Yes, and we'll get into more detail into that in a little bit. The illustrators accompany words to illustrate the message, such as the circular hand motion to a company over and over and over again, or nodding in a particular direction, or eye rolling to show exasperation. Of course, I'm doing all of these as I'm saying.
Yeah.
And Will's looking at me like, dude, why are you doing that? But,
yeah. I might have rolled my eyes a little bit. I got to be honest.
He did. Next are the regulators. These give feedback, such as head nods and a few things that are vocal but nonverbal, such as and These
various sorts of grunts.
Yes. These express interest or boredom, and a lot of people find it difficult to maintain a conversation without this feedback. For example, something that we've discussed on the podcast before is Will does a lot better with tricks of the trade when I am not in the room, because he naturally is expecting the uh-huhs and mm-hms, and I have to go in and edit them out, or he'll say something and then he'll pause and look at me and then he'll be like, right?
Yeah, and that's kind of a problem when you're trying to get content down that isn't a conversation with somebody else in the room that you just had a conversation with.
Yes, exactly.
And so that's why we have to break that, is because that's actually, like, it's a good pattern for me most of the time, but in this case, it really burns me, and I'm actually like doing the hand chopping motion on the desk, which is complete nonverbal. I'm so sorry. But yeah, we do have to do that just because of that whole feedback loop, and because I've got that practice of waiting for feedback.
Honestly, I cut out a lot of that in our back and forth conversation during the episode, just because it helps you and me continue the talking.
But it doesn't sound good to listeners.
Yeah, it does nothing for the listeners because they're listening to the conversation, not waiting on a nonverbal from the other one of us.
Right, and they may be going, right, and nodding their head and saying things like that. When someone else is doing it, it's a distraction to them.
Finally are the adapter gestures, and these satisfy some physical need, such as scratching, or adjusting, or repositioning, or biting your fingernails. They could be psychological needs, such as anxiety or hostility. These tend to be the most regulated when in a public forum.
Versus a private scenario.
In private, I know...
well, there's one fellow that we know that taps his foot all the time in private conversations. He doesn't do it in meetings, but one-on-one, it's happening.
Yes.
And that comes out of a psychological need, but that shifts between public and private quite a bit.
It does. And like I said, these are the most regulated. These are the ones that people really try not to show in public, though sometimes people think they're private when they're really not, such as driving their car.
Yeah.
So just a heads up, guys. People can see you through your windows.
Yeah. Funny that.
They know when you're picking your nose. Next is eye contact. The amount of eye contact indicates a level of trust, and it can be important in maintaining the flow of a conversation or used to gauge the other person's response.
Well, the thing is, if you're making eye contact, you also, in your peripheral visual field, you're getting the rest of their face.
Yes.
And that's probably why that's really that important, underlying.
It's more, I guess, less eye-to-eye contact and more face-to-face.
Yeah.
Because my youngest sister, and I'm sure she won't mind me mentioning this, but she's deaf in one ear. She sometimes will watch people's mouths to lip read what they're saying, especially if they're standing slightly to her left, which is her bad ear. So
I've seen her do that. I realize that now. I hadn't put two and two together. But
actually, if you ever notice, whenever we ever went to the movies, she always positioned herself either on the far left side or to where I was sitting to her left.
Yeah.
It has become an unconscious thing for her because she trusts me. And I've noticed her starting to do that with her husband, too.
Well, she can pick up nonverbals from you better, too. So
yes.
She's not closing off a communication channel.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a lot of what the eye contact thing is I'm reestablishing a communication channel with the other party.
Exactly. And a few things to note here with eye contact is Will and I both know plenty of developers who are extremely interested in their shoes when having conversations with you.
Yes.
And it's almost they're afraid to look at you. But guys,
and I don't blame them.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you had to look at us, yeah. But no, seriously though, if you're afraid to look at someone, think about it this way: looking at them shows that you're interested in what they're saying. Looking down at your shoes shows that I'm in trouble. Think about the little kid.
Yeah.
What do? When they're in trouble, they look down at their shoes
and they mumble.
Yes. Exactly.
And you don't want to get yourself into that habit because you will feel that way.
Even when you're being complimented by someone like your boss, if you're looking at your shoes and mumbling, you're going to feel like you're getting in trouble, even though they're telling you how great of a job you're doing.
Yeah.
So it's just something to keep in mind. One thing is, if looking at someone's eyes is intimidating, you can look at other areas of their face. The trick is don't stare.
Yeah, and don't do it too long. Like, you have to
try to be natural. If they're speaking and you're really interested in what they're saying, you can lean in and look at them a little bit longer than if you're really not that interested and you're just like bored, because it'll show on your face that you're bored. And if you're just staring them down and you're bored, that looks intimidating.
Yes, it does. And in some cultures too, the amount of eye contact varies quite a bit, because there's some cultures that too much eye contact very quickly turns into, oh, you're trying to intimidate me and now we're going to fight.
Speaking of cultures, the next one is very culture sensitive, and that is touch. This definitely shows the level of intimacy. And it can vary from a handshake to a hug to a pat on the back.
Or, if you touch somebody on the face, like if you walk up to another dude and touch them on the face, you're going to get down right there. There's going to be a fight.
Yeah.
Because that's an unacceptable level of intimacy. Like, touch really, really implies a level of intimacy in every culture, but in ours, there's a certain level that's allowed. Some other cultures, it's even further out. Like, they're more cold and distant.
Yeah, and some they're closer.
Yes.
So this and the next topic, which is personal space, both show levels of intimacy and are both very, very culture specific.
Well, I mean, this gets into the whole proxemics thing, which is the study of personal space.
Yes.
And you've got a link here from Skills You Need.
Yes.
Which is a website we beat the daylights out of for these outlines because it has so much good stuff in there.
They have some great stuff there. So this talks about the different levels of distance in proxemics. And you can tell that...
Is it proxemics or proxemics?
I have no clue. I've only read it. I've never heard it.
Same here.
There are 4 basic levels of distance for personal space. There's intimate distance, personal distance, social, and public distance. So intimate distance is going to be from touching to right around 1.5 feet. Personal distance is going to pick up where intimate leaves off, so at about 1.5 feet out to about 3 to 4 feet.
Yeah, give or take.
Give or take, yeah. And that's going to be, so your intimate distance is going to be with close relatives, family members,
brother
wife,
from another mother, something like that.
Wife, girlfriend.
Wife.
Yeah. Whereas personal distance is kind of going to be where you keep most of your friends.
Yeah.
Where you're hanging out, your buddies. Yeah, you may high five. If you haven't seen each other in a long time, you may hug or something. But for the most part, you're going to be about 1 foot to 3 to 4 feet apart throughout the interaction. Next is social distance, which is about 3 to 4 feet out to 9 to 10 feet.
Yeah.
And this is going to be kind of like your group interaction, or the level you keep like acquaintances.
If you were talking to most of your Facebook friends.
Yeah.
Because most of them are really not close friends. Mm-hmm. More than likely, they're social connections that you have. So you keep a certain level of distance there. And the last one is public distance. And that's when you're interacting with people that you don't know. There's some dude that walked up on the street and talked to you.
Well, I would say social distance is kind of about that too. This public distance is more like what teachers and speakers have.
Yeah.
So we're looking around 10 to 15 feet, really. I mean, it's like, the distance between the front row and the podium at a conference, or
that makes sense.
Yeah, that's kind of where these are, and you're going to see this play out in conversations. I have a great example. I was at work the other day, and I work with one of my friends who's on her way to becoming a good friend. We've worked together at other places, and she reminds me so much of my sister. It's not funny. Like, we just get along really well, and we pick on each other and stuff. But with her, I have like right at the edge of intimate distance to personal distance, because we're friends. And then my boss joined the conversation, and so it went from a 2-person conversation to a 3-person, and we kind of spread almost into like a triangular shaped circle, and that it went from that personal 2 to 3 foot distance to 3 to 4 foot distance, because we didn't want to be too loud, but we were having a group conversation.
Yeah, and if you watch these kind of conversations, you can actually tell a lot about the relationship of people. Like, I know you and I have played this game at restaurants, and I've probably played this with a dozen other people as well, like where you look around at the different tables and you look at how people are sitting and how they're interacting, and you try to figure out why they're there and how they know each other.
Yeah, we've done that so many times.
And
it's fun.
Distance is a huge one. Like, when they get up and you see how close together they are when they leave, you can tell so much about their relationship. It's not funny.
Exactly. Next is paralanguage. We've kind of hit on these a little bit on some of the regulator gestures, but these are aspects of voice other than speech. They could be ums, or uh-huh, mm-hmm, or pitch, tone, and speed.
Yeah, because you and I have a friend that when he is trying to get a point across, he sounds very, very angry.
Yes.
Because he just gets louder.
And he apologizes for it so much.
Yeah, and we totally rag on him about it all the time, too. But,
yeah.
But,
because that's us.
Yeah, because, hey, we are what we are. But, these things really come out, especially, nervousness and social awkwardness will come out in pitch. Like, think of the 13-year-old kid with the voice that's cracking in a social situation. Like, think of Steve Urkel from whatever that show was. I can't remember.
Family Matters.
Family Matters, yes. Like,
why do I remember that?
I don't know.
All things.
I'm so sorry. But, this stuff really comes out. And if you are observant, you can pick a lot of these things out in a way that a lot of people around you can't.
Yeah, a lot of this has to do with observing, and we're going to talk about that in just a moment. I do want to hit on one more thing, speaking of nervousness, and that is physiological changes, such as sweating or increased blinking, can show nervousness. They can also show dishonesty or a disjoint between what's being said and what's being communicated. The thing about nonverbal communication is these are not isolated incidents. You really need to look for patterns or groups of gestures such as eye contact, tone, body language, all together, and not just read a single gesture. The example I have with this is a story I read about a photographer who kept fussing and fussing at this kid to look at him. And he was just like, this kid is horrible. He's not paying attention. Turned out the kid had a lazy eye.
Yeah.
And it was like that one thing was what was really getting this photographer up in arms. And the kid was paying rapt attention to him. It's just he had a lazy eye.
Yeah.
And the photographer, of course, in the story, he said he apologized to the kid and felt terrible about it. But you can avoid these by looking for patterns rather than one specific thing.
Well, you kind of think about it almost like a criminal trial, right? There's circumstantial evidence, and then there's actual, like, real solid evidence. Like a video camera footage of a crime being committed is actual solid evidence. Nonverbals are not that.
Nonverbals are the circumstantial.
Right. It's, oh, you happen to be there. Oh, you happen to have a motive. It's a collection of things that tell you something, not individuals.
And the trick with these is to pay attention to the patterns and the inconsistencies within those patterns. Do the nonverbal communications match the message? Such as saying yes, but shaking your head no. That communicates a completely different message than just saying yes, just shaking your head no, or saying yes and shaking your head yes.
Yeah, it indicates kind of a mixed mindset on it.
Mm-hmm. Now, some of the patterns, this again is not exhaustive, just some of the more prominent patterns that can be seen include defensive pattern. And this is kind of hand and arm gestures that are small, close to the body, almost closed in. Very few facial expressions, like they're trying to hide their facial expressions. Being physically turned away, arms and legs crossed in front of the body, and having very little eye contact, i.e. staring at your shoes throughout the entire conversation.
Right, because they're trying not to draw attention.
Yes.
I mean, you see this behavior with gorillas and chimps and things as well, right? When there's the dominant one, if you look at the one that's not dominant, they're making themselves smaller.
Yes.
So they don't get the daylights beat out of them. And we have those behavior patterns too as human beings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly it. It's trying to not be noticed. This could be defensive because you're uncomfortable, or defensive because what you're saying is not accurate or truthful. There could be a lot of reasons for that. The trick here is, what we're talking about is recognizing the pattern. The reason for the pattern could be lots of different things.
Yeah, this is where the hypothesis gets formed. It's not where the test is completed.
Exactly. I like that. That's a great way of putting it. Next is lack of interest or bored. And this is really good when you're speaking to a group or in meetings. Typically, heads are down, eyes may be glazed over or looking elsewhere. You'll see a lot of adapter gestures, such as fiddling with clothes or pins, or sitting slumped in chairs. And this one's a little bit more, you get a pretty strong hypothesis that people are bored with this one, because this particular pattern shows that blatantly. Similar to the defensive pattern, the lying or avoiding a topic pattern. Before I get into this, I would also like to point out that this could also be nervousness. So again, this is where the hypothesis is formed, not where the test is complete.
Well, to some degree, nervousness is the manifestation of feeling like you're lying to yourself.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So this pattern is little or no eye contact. Typically, hands or fingers are in front of the mouth. Your body may be turned away. Some physiological changes could be increased rate of breathing, changes in complexion, or increased perspiration. You could also see changes in voice, or hear changes in voice, I should say, such as change in pitch, stammering, lots of throat clearing. Of course, could also be allergy season.
Yeah.
But these are all things, like I said, these are patterns. And it's not when they do this, it means that. It's when all of these things add up, there's a good chance that it is this.
Yeah, it's collection of evidence to make you look for a hypothesis, not a hypothesis in itself, or it's not as direct as that.
Yeah, I think this is where what we were talking about earlier with the various levels of advice, where we tend to go for the more narrow focus, and on a broad range, it's easy to say, oh, well, when they do these, it means they're lying.
Yeah.
But when you really get down to it, no, it could be they're nervous. It could be that they aren't allowed to talk about something, and so they're not sure how to have this conversation without revealing something they're not allowed to reveal.
Yeah, and that can actually, I've seen that shake out quite a few times in meetings.
Yeah. No.
Where somebody knows that there's layoffs coming, for instance, and then somebody's talking about what they're doing, 6 months from now in the company, and this other person's looking very, very agitated and nervous the
Yeah.
entire meeting. I've seen that happen.
I can totally see that. And then the last pattern I have on here is careful reflection on an answer. This is great for interviews, either if you're the interviewer or the interviewee. So someone that is really reflecting on an answer, their eyes tend to look away and return only to give the answer. Fingers may stroke their cheek or their chin, hands to the cheek as they're contemplating, and their head tends to be tilted with the eyes looking up.
And they also tend to look towards the same place with the same stuff. Like if they're contemplating things, they tend to look in the same direction. Like there's habits there. It's not the same across people, but it tends to be very similar for the same person.
Yes.
Like
yes,
if I'm
exactly.
thinking about something, I tend to look up and to the left. And that's a habit I've noticed. You do that too. See?
Yeah, I was just thinking, there is something that I read a long time ago that if a person is looking up and to the left, they're remembering, and up and to the right, they're making it up.
Yeah.
There's no hard evidence behind that.
No, there's
whatsoever.
not. And I know exactly which book that's from because it's leather bound and you borrowed it from me and I haven't gotten it back. But
I told you, I know exactly where it is.
no, I'm just ragging on you.
Okay, so before we close out the episode, I do want to kind of go through some scenarios and some things to avoid or when it all goes wrong. And the big thing here is some advice that you're not going to hear from a lot of people talking about nonverbals, and that is there is no fake it till you make it with nonverbal communication. So much of it is physiological. You can kind of decrease how much you put out, but you cannot fake it. Speaking of confidence, if you're not actually confident, you're going to have inconsistencies in your pattern that are going to show you're not confident.
Yeah, and if you were able to not be confident and play confident to the degree that nobody could tell from your nonverbals, you're in the wrong profession if you're going into programming because you should go into acting.
That's so true. Even a lot of actors, if you talk to them,
oh yeah, they have to really get into the character.
Oh
and
yeah,
do the
it's.
thing.
I mean, to really get that confidence, like if they're going to play someone who is like overly confident, they have to get into that overly confident mindset because we have a lot less conscious control over our nonverbal communication. They're more emotional in nature and more instinctive. And also, when you do try to dampen that or have a lack of nonverbal calm, it's usually someone that is carefully controlling their body language. And this could be several different things. It could be trying to hide their true emotions, or it could be nervousness in public speaking.
Yeah.
Or nervousness in a specific topic, or like we said before, when you know something that you cannot say. And that could be it too.
Yeah, and it always comes out.
Yeah.
Because human beings lie, animals tend not to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for
And
the
this
most
is
part.
the animal part of the human being coming out.
So there's also some over-the-top stuff like overzealousness and awkwardness. So someone that comes on too strong to the point that they're trying to be confident and friendly and outgoing, and they come off as intimidating and intense.
Yes.
This is the person that stares through people, has too firm of a handshake.
This is like me when I started kind of coming out of my shell at the tail end of college. I was somewhat intimidating because I was,
Yes, you were.
Yeah, I wasn't, I was socially awkward and I was working on it, and I didn't quite have all the tight feedback loops at that point, somewhat mastered. And so I would look at people and just, have a conversation with them. And, I wasn't reading the nonverbals well. Like, this is a back and forth that happens over time and you get where you can handle it. But
yeah. It's something that you do kind of learn and grow with. But the other thing too here is, have you ever worked with someone who is a first-time manager or been on a school or other type of function with someone who is their first time ever being put in charge of a group.
Like a hall monitor.
Yeah. They tend to be way overzealous on their job. Think Cartman when he was made a hall monitor and thought he was Dog the Bounty Hunter.
Think a mall cop.
Well, yeah, there's that too.
Yeah.
Haven't seen that one, so.
Yeah.
The other side of this is someone that is too tightly wound. Someone that radiates tension. They may be a friendly, interesting person, but their shoulders and eyebrows are raised. They have stiff body motions and a shrill voice, and people are just put uncomfortable by being around them and never get the chance to get to know, hey, this is actually a really chill, fun person. It's just their body language comes out as...
Well, you and I went to college with a guy like this, and he's loosened up a lot, but I mean, I remember several conversations in college where people were like, well, he just makes me itch.
Yeah.
It just makes me uncomfortable because of the way that he carries himself.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very easy to do, especially with certain worldviews.
Yeah. And finally, what we've promised the whole episode, cultural crossovers. So a few of these, and again, this is non-exhaustive. First off is the thumbs up gesture. In the US and the UK, that's a sign of approval. However, in places like Greece, Italy, or the Middle East,
not so much.
It's an offensive sign.
Yeah.
We've already mentioned the OK sign, which is the thumb and index finger together. In Western culture, that means okay. In Japan, it's a sign for money. Something I learned putting this together. However, in a lot of Arabic countries, it's a threat.
And it's a particularly vile threat, if I recall correctly from one of my Arabic friends.
Another one that we may not even think about is pointing. In the US and UK, in most English-speaking countries, point with their index finger. However, Germany points with their little finger. And a lot of Asian countries, it's considered rude to use a single finger to point, so they will point with their entire hand.
Yeah, and it's the same thing. I remember this from Japanese. If you the come here gesture, like the way we do that in America is basically accusing somebody of being a thief.
Wow.
If I recall correctly, like you have to do it a different way. It's the way your hand is flipped, not the way your finger moves. And it's...
Yeah. Well, that's like one that I don't even have on here is in the UK, you count with starting with your thumb for 1, 2, because 2 fingers up, like the index and middle finger, is basically the same thing as the middle finger in America.
I didn't know that.
Now, if they're spread apart, that's peace. But if they're together, that is very rude. Also, personal space. In British societies, it is very inappropriate to enter intimate space in public. So even couples don't...
Yeah, they keep a distance. They're very Victorian on that still.
However, in Middle East and Asian countries, personal space is a lot less than in Western countries.
Yes.
Finally, posture, bowing, for example, in the U.S. and most Western cultures is not done.
Outside of fencing.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, in general,
not
it's not done, and it's generally criticized. However, in Japan, it shows rank. Slouching is rude in a lot of Northern European areas, as is hands in your pocket in Turkey. A couple others are sitting with your legs crossed is offensive in countries like Ghana or Turkey. And here's one that I found interesting is in Thailand and Saudi Arabia, showing the soles of your feet is very offensive.
Yeah, and I'm kind of curious where that
originated.
Like where that custom comes from. It's like, I guess maybe like you're showing what's on the bottom of your shoe, and maybe you stepped in something. Like I don't know. Yeah,
I mean that. Of
course, a lot of these come from somewhere where you're like, what's the point of this?
Mm-hmm. I would love to do a little bit more study into kind of where some of these traditions come from. I think it'd be really interesting. But that about wraps us up for this week. Before we close out, Will, What do you have for us this week for tricks of the trade?
Well, we talked about nonverbal cues and manners, and I've encountered quite a few programmers over the years and quite a few, people of various different nerdy persuasions. It's not just programmers that understand that these rules are kind of arbitrary, like personal space is arbitrary. Gestures are arbitrary. The way that you slouch in a chair or don't slouch in a chair is arbitrary, and can't seem to get past the fact that, yes, this is arbitrary, but if you don't follow these rules, the rest of society doesn't really understand that it's arbitrary, so you look like you're rude. I'll give an example. I know a guy that, in regards to manners, for instance, holding doors open, for ladies walking through and all that sort of thing, he'll say, okay, this is very arbitrary. And it is. It's entirely arbitrary. It's entirely cultural. However, when you don't do that, you come across as rude, and that affects you negatively. And this is something I really kind of want to beat into the heads of people, is just because a rule is arbitrary doesn't mean that you don't follow it. And especially with social norms and things like that, you can get yourself into trouble very quickly, and you can be completely right.
You and I both grew up with a Christian background.
Yes.
I know not all of our listeners did, and we have listeners of various religions and faiths, but in our background, there is something that states basically to the effect, live in the world, but don't be of the world. And that's exactly what you're saying. It says, yes, you can recognize that these are arbitrary, but that doesn't mean you don't do them.
Right. And in fact, if you recognize that they're arbitrary, you know when to break the rules.
Yes.
And how to break the rules. You don't just arbitrarily just go, I'm going to break the rules, I'm going to be a rebel without a cause.
We've had that conversation before.
Yeah, we've had that quite a few times. And this is something that's missing from a lot of people's upbringing, and I really don't understand where that comes from. So, that's my little opinion piece. It's not exactly a trick of the trade, but, it's Will's rant.
Stand by for Titanfall.
If you have a question or comment for us, please email us at neckbeards@CompleteDeveloperPodcast.com. Our theme music is an excerpt from Stand By for Titanfall by Pure Bells, available on SoundCloud and licensed under Creative Commons. The intro music for IoTs is Hillbilly Hip Hop by Jason Belcher. For references, show notes, and to sign up to our email list, be sure and check out the website at CompleteDeveloperPodcast.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at CompleteDevPod and like our page on Facebook to keep up with the news about the show. Thanks for listening. See you next time.